So talking about an album today that came out back in 1999, which is quite an important album to me. So it's this album here, The Wonderful by Madness. This isn't the first version of it. I can't find my first version of it today. It's kicking around somewhere. That's a 2010 reissue of it. This is interesting for a number of reasons for me. Well, the first thing was when I was really... After kind of, I got into music and kind of like not fell out of love with it, but I wasn't buying as much as I was. And then when I was at school, I think it was, and it was around about, I suppose, 1990, 1991. It's when the KLF were big. That's kind of, I remember particularly, I started listening to bands that weren't actively, or weren't functioning at the time, weren't together. A number of bands. Madness was the first one that I kind of really became obsessed with. And when I say obsessed, I was buying the back catalogues and, trying to find out everything about them that I could. And I remember I bought The Rise and Fall by Madness. And then in 1992, they released this compilation, a best of, which they seem to be doing every 5 minutes these days, called Divine Madness. And off the back of that, the band then decided to reform, and they played 2 legendary gigs. The first Madstock Festival in 1992, where there was an earthquake because they played so well and everyone jumping up and down. So this kind of led to like people being interested back in the band again. And I managed to, my first Madness gig was the second Madstock in 1994, which was Ace. And then in 1996, the third Madstock, I think, is when they started playing new songs from this. One of the tracks from this album called Wonderful, which ironically wasn't on this album, even though it was titled it. It was on an import version of it, and I think it's a bonus track on this album here. But when this album came out, although it got quite favourably reviewed, I think, at the time of it, it didn't. I don't think the nation. Well, I don't think the Madness fans got behind it, but I don't think it did as well as kind of the band had hoped for. And this in turn led to a kind of like, there was a BBC documentary not long after this came out. And it was really, really odd because at the end of it kind of made it, I remember they've like captions came up at the end of it and it says something about the future of Madness is unsure and what have you. And being at the time, I was kind of like really gutted because I was like, well, hold on, a band that I really love have got back together, and it's all 7 members of the band are back in the studio. It's the same producers, Clive Lang and Alan Stanley back involved on it. And you'd had the singles, Johnny the Halls, Love Struck, Drip Fed Fred. Drip Fed Fred had Ian Jury on it as well. Great song, really like potentially. I couldn't understand why this album wasn't bigger than it was at the time. Another interesting connection for me with this album was I started working for HMV the year this album came out. Literally the week that this album came out, my first shop that I was working in opened as well. And this in turn kind of like, after this album came out, Madness did the covers album, the Danger Man Sessions, which that was a bizarre time to be a Madness fan. That in turn led to 2009's Liberty and Knowlton Folgate, which I think personally is the greatest Madness album that there is. And that's when they became national treasures because the fan base was still there for Madness. But around the time when it was Jubilee and they played on the rooftop of Buckingham Palace and what have you, suddenly a lot of people were really into Madness that weren't necessarily into them before. But still, I really like this album. I think it's really, really good. It's very important. At the time when this album came out, a lot of their peers were kind of just living off that kind of Heritage Act kind of thing, not putting out new music. And I was impressed that Madness were brave enough to like go, well, no, we don't want to live off that. We're going to go and do something different. And I think that's kudos to them. But there you go. That's my thoughts on this album.